My name is Margot, and I'm 32 years old. Up until a few months ago, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. I had a decent job as a freelance graphic designer, a cozy little apartment in Brooklyn, and a family that, while a bit eccentric, I believed loved me unconditionally. My grandmother, Clara, was the matriarch of our family, a beacon of kindness and generosity. She was the one who always had an extra dollar for ice cream, a comforting hug when you needed it most, and a story for every occasion. Losing her was like losing a piece of my own heart. The world felt a little dimmer without her in it, and the silence in her old house, where we gathered for holidays, was deafening. But what I didn't know then was that her passing, as heartbreaking as it was, would rip open a wound far deeper than grief, a wound festering with deceit and betrayal. The truth about my family, about who they really were, was about to be laid bare, all thanks to a single, overlooked detail in my grandmother's bank account. And trust me when I say you're not blood, it wasn't just a cruel accusation, it was the chilling key to everything. The day of Grandma Clara's reading was a somber affair, draped in the heavy silence of unspoken grief and thinly veiled anticipation. We gathered in Mr. Henderson's dimly lit law office, the air thick with the scent of old paper and nervous energy. My Uncle Robert, a man whose smile rarely reached his eyes, sat opposite me, his wife Aunt Carol, clutching his arm like a life raft. My cousin David fiddled with his phone, pretending to be engrossed, but I could feel his restless gaze darting around the room. I, on the other hand, just felt numb. All I wanted was for this formality to be over so I could go home and properly mourn my grandmother. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, his voice a low rumble that cut through the tension. He began to read, his words painting a picture of Clara's final wishes. Her beloved antique armoire went to Aunt Susan, her extensive cookbook collection to my mother, and various sentimental items distributed among the other cousins. When he got to the financial assets, a collective shift went through the room. My grandmother had always been frugal, but we knew she had a comfortable nest egg, primarily from her late husband's pension and some shrewd investments. Then came the bombshell. And to my dearest granddaughter Margot, Mr. Henderson read, I leave the sum of $100,000, as well as the contents of my primary savings account, to be used for her future and her dreams. A gasp rippled through the room. I felt a surge of warmth, then confusion. $100,000? And her savings account? That was substantial. Too substantial, considering what I knew of her usual spending. Uncle Robert's face, usually carefully composed, twisted into a mask of disbelief, then something uglier. 100,000? And the savings? That's impossible, he blurted out, his voice sharp with accusation. Aunt Carol squeezed his arm tighter, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and resentment. My mother looked bewildered, casting a quick glance at me as if to confirm I'd heard correctly. Mr. Henderson, unperturbed, simply continued. The remaining balance of her estate, after all bequests and outstanding debts are settled, will be divided equally among her children. The meeting ended abruptly, a flurry of hurried goodbyes and averted gazes. As I stepped out into the crisp autumn air, Uncle Robert cornered me, his voice a low hiss. Margot, there must be a mistake. Grandma would never have given you that much. She always said the money was for all of us. His tone was laced with a venom I'd never heard from him before. I tried to explain that I was just as surprised as he was, but he waved a dismissive hand. Something isn't right. I'm going to look into this. His words and the look in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just about money, it was about something far more insidious. And little did I know, this was just the beginning of the unraveling. The chill in the air matched the one in my heart as I walked away from the law office, Uncle Robert's words echoing in my ears. The initial shock of the inheritance had given way to a gnawing unease. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork, emotional phone calls, and the lingering sense that something was amiss. The estate lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was efficient, but even he seemed a little puzzled by the unexpected generosity towards me. When I received the detailed bank statements for Grandma Clara's primary savings account, the first red flag practically jumped off the page. My grandmother had always been meticulous with her finances. Every bill paid on time, every expense accounted for, every penny stretched. Yet, the statements showed a series of significant withdrawals over the past 2 years, far exceeding her usual spending habits. There were multiple cash withdrawals of several $1,000s each, sometimes twice in a single month. Clara was a woman who preferred to pay by check or card. Large cash withdrawals were completely out of character for her. I called my mother, hoping for an explanation. "Mom, do you remember Grandma ever taking out a lot of cash? Like thousands of dollars at a time?" My mother paused, a frown in her voice. "Not that I know of, honey. She was always so careful. She didn't like carrying a lot of cash." "Why do you ask?" I explained what I'd seen on the statements. My mother grew quiet. "That's odd," she finally said. "Maybe she was helping someone. But she usually told me about things like that." My mind immediately went to Uncle Robert. He'd been struggling financially for years, always complaining about his business ventures failing. Could he have been borrowing money from Grandma? But why would she give it to him in cash and not tell anyone? And why such large amounts? The second red flag appeared when I started looking at the dates of these withdrawals. They seemed to coincide with periods when Uncle Robert and Aunt Carol had been visiting Grandma more frequently. I remembered Aunt Carol always complaining about their dire straits and how much pressure Robert was under. It had always sounded like an act to me, a bid for sympathy. Now it felt like something more. I decided to dig deeper. I went to Grandma's house, which was still mostly untouched, a quiet testament to her life. I started looking through her old papers, her financial records, anything that might shed some light. Tucked away in an old shoebox, I found a few handwritten notes. They were short, almost like a code, but recurring phrases jumped out at me. "Our loan," "see payment," and specific amounts that matched some of the smaller withdrawals on the bank statements. These were older notes, dating back 5 or 6 years. It seemed this wasn't a new pattern. The biggest red flag, the one that made my stomach churn, was a series of checks made out to cash and endorsed with a signature that, while similar to my grandmother's, had a slight tremor, a wavering line that wasn't characteristic of her firm, elegant hand. My grandmother had suffered a minor stroke about 3 years prior, which had affected her handwriting slightly, making it less steady. But these particular signatures on these specific checks looked too shaky, almost forced. It was subtle, but I had spent countless hours with my grandmother, watching her write cards, sign documents. I knew her handwriting intimately. My heart pounded as a terrible possibility began to form in my mind. Could someone have been taking advantage of her? The thought was unbearable, a betrayal so profound it made me sick. I remembered Uncle Robert's angry outburst at the will reading, his immediate disbelief at my inheritance. His desperation for money, coupled with the suspicious withdrawals and the questionable signatures, started to paint a very disturbing picture. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to find out the truth, not just for my peace of mind, but for Grandma Clara. She deserved justice. The uneasy feeling transformed into a chilling certainty, a cold dread that settled deep in my bones. The more I looked, the more the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture I desperately wished wasn't true. The suspicious withdrawals from Grandma Clara's bank account began years ago, a trickle at first, then a steady stream, escalating in the last 3 years of her life. I meticulously cross-referenced every transaction with her calendar, with family gatherings, with anything that could explain why my financially astute grandmother was suddenly pulling out thousands in cash. There were entries in her personal ledger that simply said Robert, loan, or Carol, help, followed by specific amounts that mirrored some of the smaller, earlier cash withdrawals. These were from before her stroke, and her handwriting was clear. It seemed she had, indeed, been helping them financially for quite some time. But these notes stopped abruptly about 2.5 years ago, precisely when the larger, more frequent, and more suspicious cash withdrawals began. And on the later checks, the cashed checks, the signature was increasingly shaky. I remembered distinct periods when Grandma seemed more withdrawn, more anxious. She'd always brushed it off as just getting old. But now a horrifying thought took root. Was she being pressured? Exploited? The very idea made my blood run cold. I started discreetly asking questions. I called my mother again, this time more direct. "Mom, did Grandma ever mention anything about needing money or anyone asking her for money after her stroke?" My mother hesitated. "Well, she did seem a little preoccupied sometimes. And I remember a few times Robert and Carol would be there, and Grandma would seem tired afterward. They were always asking about her investments, her savings. I just thought they were being concerned, you know?" Her voice trailed off, a dawning realization in her tone. Then I called Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, who lived a few hours away but visited Grandma regularly. "Aunt Susan, did you ever notice anything unusual with Grandma's finances or with Robert and Carol's visits?" Aunt Susan sighed. "Oh, Margot, it's so hard to say. Robert was always in some financial mess. And Carol, she was very good at making you feel sorry for them. Grandma was so kind-hearted. I worried about her, but she always insisted she was fine. I did notice she seemed to go to the bank more often, or at least she'd have bank envelopes around, which was unusual for her. But I never pressed it. Her words, full of regret, confirmed my fears. My grandmother's kindness had been weaponized against her. The most damning piece of evidence, however, came from an unexpected source. Grandma Clara had kept a small, locked diary, a place where she jotted down her thoughts, her worries, her daily observations. I'd found the key tucked away in a teacup, as if she intended for it to be found. The entries from the last 2 years were heartbreaking. They weren't explicit accusations, but they painted a clear picture of her declining health, her growing confusion, and her increasing fear. Robert and Carol here again. Need more money. Said it's urgent, one entry read. Another a few weeks later. My hand hurts today. Hard to write. Carol helped with the bank. And then a chilling entry dated just a few months before her death. They say I owe them. That I promised. But I don't remember. My head is so foggy. They say if I don't give them money, they won't visit anymore. I don't want to be alone. My grandmother, the strong, independent woman I knew, had been slowly, subtly, systematically drained of her resources and her spirit. They had isolated her, manipulated her, played on her fears of loneliness. And the money they had stolen, the money that should have gone to secure her comfort in her final years, or to benefit the family as a whole, had instead lined their pockets. The thought made me physically ill. This wasn't just fraud. It was a cruel, calculated betrayal of the deepest trust. The knot in my stomach tightened, a cold, hard stone of realization forming in my gut. Armed with the bank statements, the contradictory notes, the shaky signatures, and the devastating diary entries, I knew I couldn't keep silent any longer. I called a family meeting, telling my mother and Aunt Susan that I had some important information to share regarding Grandma Clara's estate. I deliberately did not invite Uncle Robert or Aunt Carol. I wanted to present my findings to my mother and aunt first, to gauge their reactions and prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The meeting took place at my apartment, a neutral territory. My mother looked anxious, and Aunt Susan seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. I laid out the evidence methodically. The unusual cash withdrawals, the dates coinciding with Robert and Carol's visits, the change in Grandma's handwriting on the cashed checks, and finally, the heartbreaking excerpts from Grandma's diary. As I read the entry about Grandma being threatened with loneliness, my mother gasped, tears welling in her eyes. Aunt Susan buried her face in her hands. They exploited her, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. They took advantage of her kindness, her declining health. They manipulated her into giving them money. My mother was devastated. I can't believe Robert would do this. He's my brother. And Carol, Aunt Susan added, her voice thick with disgust. She always seemed so sweet, but I always felt something was off. We decided we needed to confront Robert and Carol. It wasn't about the money anymore, not entirely. It was about Grandma Clara, about her dignity, about seeking justice for the quiet torment she endured. The confrontation took place a few days later, at Uncle Robert's house. He agreed to meet, likely assuming I wanted to discuss the will again, perhaps even offer to share my inheritance. He and Aunt Carol sat across from us, their faces a mixture of feigned concern and underlying irritation. I wasted no time. Robert, Carol, I've been looking into Grandma Clara's finances. Robert's eyes narrowed. What about them? Everything was handled legally. Was it? I countered, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I laid out the bank statements, pointing to the suspicious withdrawals. Grandma didn't make these. Not all of them, not willingly. Aunt Carol let out a nervous laugh. Margot, what are you implying? That we stole from your grandmother? That's outrageous. I'm implying you took advantage of her, I stated, my voice rising slightly. That you pressured her, manipulated her, when she was vulnerable. I then pulled out the diary. And I have her own words. I read the entry about them threatening not to visit. The color drained from Robert's face. Aunt Carol's jaw dropped. The feigned composure crumbled. That's a lie. Robert roared, finally losing his temper. She gave us that money. She wanted to help us. She was old, she was confused, she probably didn't even remember. She remembered enough to write about it in her diary. I retorted, my anger finally breaking through. She remembered enough to feel alone and scared because of you. You don't know anything. Aunt Carol shrieked, her voice shrill. You're not even blood. You were just her charity case, always clinging to her. We're her real family. The words hit me like a physical blow. You're not blood. The phrase, dripping with malice, confirmed everything. It was their desperate attempt to invalidate my claim, to dismiss my discovery. But it only solidified my resolve. Their true colors, ugly and cruel, were now laid bare. And I knew with absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. The sting of their words fueled a new determination, solidifying my resolve to fight for what was right. The venomous outburst from Aunt Carol, the declaration that I wasn't blood, solidified my conviction. This wasn't just about money. It was about protecting Grandma Clara's legacy and seeking justice for her quiet suffering. My mother and Aunt Susan, equally outraged, agreed that we had to pursue legal action. It was a daunting prospect. Going to court against family, even family who had betrayed us, was a painful thought. But the alternative, letting Robert and Carol get away with their deception, was simply unbearable. We returned to Mr. Henderson, the estate lawyer, and presented him with all the evidence. The bank statements, the forged-looking signatures on the cashed checks, my grandmother's diary entries, and our collective testimonies about Robert and Carol's financial struggles and manipulative behavior. Mr. Henderson, a man who rarely showed emotion, looked grave. "This is a strong case for elder abuse and fraud," he stated, his voice quiet but firm. "It won't be easy. Family cases rarely are. But the evidence you've gathered is compelling." The legal process was a slow, draining grind. There were initial consultations, filing of complaints, gathering more financial records, and the constant stress of knowing we were engaged in a legal battle with our own relatives. Each step felt like a fresh wound, forcing us to revisit the painful reality of what had happened. My mother found it particularly difficult, caught between her loyalty to her brother and her heartbreak over her mother's betrayal. Robert and Carol, of course, denied everything. They hired their own lawyer, a slick, aggressive type who tried to paint me as a gold digger, an opportunistic outsider trying to usurp the true heirs. They claimed Grandma Clara had freely given them the money, that she had been perfectly lucid, and that my inheritance was simply her way of compensating me for some imagined slight. The "you're not blood" argument was a recurring theme in their defense, an ugly attempt to discredit me based on my status as a granddaughter by marriage, not by direct lineage. My biological grandfather had passed away when my mother was young, and Grandma Clara had married my step-grandfather, who then adopted my mother. While it meant I wasn't blood in the strictest biological sense to the rest of their family, Grandma Clara had always treated me as her own, more than her own flesh and blood sometimes. The emotional toll was immense. Family gatherings became awkward, tense affairs with sides clearly drawn. Some relatives, hearing only Robert and Carol's version, looked at me with suspicion. Others, who knew Robert's history, offered quiet support. I found myself isolated at times, the weight of the accusations heavy on my shoulders. But every time I felt like giving up, I thought of Grandma Clara, her gentle smile, her fierce love, and the quiet fear expressed in her diary. She deserved to have her story told, to have her dignity restored. I wasn't just fighting for money, I was fighting for her honor. And that, more than anything, kept me going. The fight was far from over, but I knew I was on the right side of it. The legal battle wore on, a testament to the bitter truth uncovered, yet a flicker of hope persisted through the darkest moments. The trial was a grueling experience, a public airing of our family's dirty laundry. Robert and Carol maintained their innocent facade, but their stories were riddled with inconsistencies. Mr. Henderson presented a compelling case, meticulously detailing the financial discrepancies, highlighting the questionable signatures, and reading the most damning entries from Grandma Clara's diary. The lawyer for Robert and Carol tried to dismiss the diary as the ramblings of a confused old woman, but the judge saw through their flimsy arguments. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the verdict came down. The judge ruled in our favor. Robert and Carol were found liable for financial elder abuse and fraud. They were ordered to repay a significant portion of the money they had taken from Grandma Clara's account, as well as pay damages. The judge's condemnation of their actions was swift and severe, a stinging rebuke to their betrayal. I watched as the color drained from Robert's face, a look of shock and defeat replacing his usual smugness. Aunt Carol began to cry, but her tears seemed more for her own predicament than for any remorse over what they had done. Justice, in some form, had been served. The aftermath, however, was complex. The family was irrevocably fractured. My mother and Aunt Susan maintained their distance from Robert and Carol, their trust shattered beyond repair. Some relatives sided with Robert and Carol, believing their narrative of victimhood and cutting ties with us. Others, seeing the undeniable evidence, expressed their disgust and offered their support. It was a painful realignment, forcing us to confront the true nature of our relationships. The money recovered from Robert and Carol, while substantial, didn't come close to fully compensating for what they had taken, nor could it erase the emotional scars. The initial inheritance I received remained mine, as it was a direct bequest from Grandma Clara and separate from the fraudulent withdrawals. The recovered funds were primarily used to cover legal fees and some of Grandma's lingering expenses, with the remainder distributed among her children as per the will's original intent for the residual estate. My mother received a portion, which she promptly donated to an elder abuse charity in Grandma Clara's name. For me, the immediate aftermath was a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The fight was over, but the wounds remained. The phrase, "You're not blood," once a cruel weapon, now felt hollow, a desperate cry from those who had proven themselves to be less family than I was. My bond with Grandma Clara, though not biological, had been rooted in genuine love and respect, a bond that ultimately led me to uncover the truth and fight for her. It was a painful lesson about the complexities of family, about the insidious nature of greed, and about the quiet strength of a woman who, even in her vulnerability, left behind a trail of breadcrumbs for me to follow. The battle was won, but the true victory was in honoring Grandma Clara's memory and ensuring that her voice, through her diary, was finally heard. The dust settled, but the air still hung heavy with the echoes of betrayal, reminding me of the profound journey I had undertaken. Life since the trial has certainly changed. Robert and Carol largely vanished from our lives, their legal woes and public shaming forcing them into a quieter, more isolated existence. My relationship with my mother and Aunt Susan, though forged in the fires of shared trauma, emerged stronger and more honest. We speak more openly now, our bond solidified by the painful truth we confronted together. The rest of the family remains a fragmented landscape, some connections severed, others tentatively healing. It's a stark reminder that sometimes the hardest truths can be found within the very fabric of who you are, revealing the cracks and fissures you never knew existed. The main lesson I learned from all of this is profound. True family isn't about blood, it's about love, trust, and integrity. My grandmother, Clara, taught me that through her life, and tragically through her death. She embodied selfless love, and her resilience, even in her vulnerability, became my guiding light. Her diary, a quiet testament to her pain, became her final act of courage, a plea for justice that I was honored to answer. The fraud wasn't just about money. It was about the erosion of trust, the betrayal of a gentle soul. And exposing it, messy and painful as it was the only way to honor her memory. I hope my story resonates with you, perhaps sparking a conversation in your own life about the people you trust and the quiet signs you might be overlooking. It's a reminder to pay attention, to protect those who are vulnerable, and to always listen to that nagging feeling in your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. This journey, born from grief and fueled by a shocking revelation, ultimately transformed me. I am no longer the naive young woman who simply accepted things at face value. I am stronger, more discerning, and fiercely protective of the bonds that truly matter. My grandmother's legacy isn't just in the money she left me. It's in the invaluable lessons she imparted, the strength she unknowingly instilled, and the unwavering belief that love, not blood, defines a family. And for that, I am eternally grateful.